Jim and John's Road to Appomattox.
Yeah.
It's like Beavis and Butthead, sorry.
Yeah. You took a car that's about as old as they are. Who said that? Hear what they said?
No, I didn't.
Something about Beavis and Butthead.
Well, that's John said that.
Oh,
Yeah, Boron said that car's almost as old as Jim and John are.
That's what he said.
okay.
About 35 years ago, I was lucky enough to be in on the start of reenactment here in Kansas City. A few guys from Jeff City started going to Illinois and started the Homeless Brigade. Then eventually it came to town here in Kansas City area. Then we had the Lone Jack Volunteers. And then pretty soon Crowley started 3rd Missouri. And we grew very fast, started going all over the country, made quite a reputation for ourselves. And eventually some of the Crowleys started Shelby's, and I rode with them for 20 years. And back in the 125ths are going on, I just never even guessed that I'd be a part of the 150s. I thought I'd be dead by then or something. And after last year, I thought I really might. But anyway, one of my goals was always to try to make the 150th Appomattox and the Lincoln Funeral Train in Springfield, Illinois. And very lucky to have the finances, the time off, and the health to finish up with that. There's only one more 153 reenactment will take place. That's at Point Lookout, Maryland Prison. And the woman who was with us, who talked to us here about her grandparents being in the middle of New York riots, she got out there also. The three of us took pictures, and John did a super job putting us all together. And so we're very glad to be able to make this trip. And there's some confusion. There was also a mile away from the National Park Service. They have 1,600 acres called the Appomattox Village, and there were about 1,000 Union troops there and about 350 Confederates, the best I could tell. And they spared no money. They brought in all kinds of people from all over the country, good speakers, put up a huge speakers band. They had for 4 days in a row, they had all kinds of talks, and then they would shift the talks around so if you missed them one day, you could pick them up the next. And it was really a good deal. But a mile away, there was also the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Appomattox, in which 3,700 reenactors participated in that. John and I just went by, but didn't spend much time there. We took off. It kind of was a bad omen. It rained. It was so foggy and rained so hard, we hardly got all the way from my house to Boonville, about 40 miles an hour. It was just unbelievable. And later we would get horrible rain in West Virginia also. We never used our sunglasses once on that trip. That tells you a little bit about how it was. But they lucked out on Thursday and Friday at Appomattox. They ended up with almost no rain and huge, huge crowds there. We thought we were going to make Roanoke in 14 hours, but at 11:30 or 12:30 at night or some crazy thing after starting at 8 in the morning driving straight through, we finally got to Roanoke and picked up Angela. And the next morning we started out for Appomattox. And on the way there, we discovered something that's the last thing on the table over here that John and I, neither one, never knew about. How many of you knew there was a National D-Day Memorial? It is, I knew it. It's an unbelievable thing. Is that next, John? Or am I getting ahead of myself? Yeah. Okay. It's a huge outdoor thing that the government meant, and they just did a really good job. There's a landing craft, and these things the Germans left the water, and the American soldiers trying to get here, and they have air puffs come up representing bullets and hand grenades and whatever else. And it's just mammoth. It's really, really huge. And why would the United States government put that in a little old tiny town in the middle of Virginia called Bedford, Virginia? And the answer was 47 men from Bedford had signed up for the Air Force, Marines, Army, and Navy, and Coast Guard. And they were in, there's a whole bunch of them in the landing craft that I don't see here. The landing craft that first landed, and they just got cut to pieces.
Well, they're the ones with the Virginia National Guard.
What?
Well, they're the ones that were part of the Virginia National Guard.
I don't know. They hadn't had any experience in the war, so it could have been. Then the second boat full of them that came along hit one of those snags that the Germans put out there, and it bottom ripped open, and they practically all drowned with all that stuff on their backs. And then another one got shot out of the sky and so forth. So in the end, 39 to 47 men from Bedford, Virginia died on D-Day. And that's more than anybody from New York, LA, or any place else. So that's why the government went there and built this beautiful thing. So it was well worth our taking our time to go see that. If you ever get near there, go see it. It's an open thing. and they, if you're old and decrepit, they'll take you in little carts and give you a special thing. So anyway, we'll go on.
May I interrupt you? The reason I
Yeah.
asked that question is that one of the divisions, there was the 1st Infantry Division was on the left, and on the right was the, I can't remember the number it was, the other division that landed on Omaha Beach.
Yeah.
Was actually had been a Virginia National Guard division.
Well, mine.
And a large number of these men in that division were from Virginia because they were still, you know, had been
Yeah,
taken
it might
on
have been
active
real big.
duty, and that's why so many of them from Virginia were killed there.
Yeah, they got, unfortunately, they're up front. Like I said, they spared no expense. They have this huge, huge stage for the opening ceremonies there. And there's another picture of the stage. And they brought in all kinds of famous speakers and all kinds of ancestors. This is part of the crowds. They said there were 25,000 people there. I don't know if they were or not, but there were a lot of people there. On the first day, which was a work day, a Thursday, Friday was a work day, and the crowds were down a little bit, and Saturday and Sunday they picked up. This is the only living relative of General Grant. He signed my parole. You'll see later here. So he was there. He's the only one I recognize there. Next.
How old a guy is he, you think,
Oh,
right now?
really old.
Is he?
Yeah. They had a famous color guard come in and had these 4 men and then had 8 or 9 guys, other guys open the ceremonies. Of course, it was just beautiful, split and polish, and they really look good. And they do this kind of stuff all over the country. They're a specially formed group just to go these kinds of ceremonies.
Later in the program, the 7 men there on the right, they fired a 21-gun salute.
Yeah. This was the great-great-grandson of the man who eventually converted the notes from pencil to ink. When Colonel Marshall was sent out by Lee to find a place to have the surrender, and he picked a place under an apple tree. Grant sent back, no, that won't do. So he looked at a tavern, that was too gunky. So then he saw Wilbur McLean, and Wilbur McLean said, yes, you could use our house. Wilbur McLean's the one that had a house that got caught up in the Battle of Manassas.
Right.
63, married a very rich woman and moved out here to get away from the war, and the war ends in his parlor. They were redoing the parlor, so if you see pictures, it looks like there's not much there. That's the reason why even the carpet had been taken up. And he said, yeah, and I'll try to take some chairs in there and help you out a little bit. Lee was there first. Oh no, might be getting ahead of myself. Anyway, Lee was there for an hour and a half waiting for Grant. And of course, Lee had on his newest, best uniform. He only took a private and 1 person with him to it. Grant was out in the field fighting the war. So he brings in 17 officers plus himself, and they got mud all over their horses and their boots and everything else. And he's just got a private jacket on. So kind of a little bit difference between the two were dressed. They sit down, and they got no paper to write the surrender terms on. So finally they find paper, and they find a pencil. Grant did have a book where you write orders, and when you write it once, it writes 3 times automatically so you could save time. So they kind of agreed on everything, then they decided to put it in ink. And it was a military, not a political thing, so not everybody signed the same paper. You had to have different papers for everybody to sign. And the guy that was assigned to transfer from pencil to ink got so nervous, he got sick, he had to leave the room, and this guy took over and wrote it out. The reason we got him here is he is a Seneca India from New York. He wasn't even a U.S. citizen because he was a Native American, but he was on Grant's staff, and he wrote it out. This is his great-great-grandson. Lee never missed a thing. Lee picked on it really quick like, and when they finally shook hands, Lee said, well, it's good to see a real American here. And this is James Robeson, you all know, a famous Civil War person. He gave a talk. They had about 20 readers also. Almost all these people are ancestors of people who were there. And of course, she's as good as he ever was. Next. There's Angela. We got a picture of her. This is the Appomattox pictures. That's the Lincoln pictures during our break. Go back and see. Some of the pictures in here aren't there, and some of there aren't here. But anyway, she took a lot of notes. This is Ed Sears. They started the program by giving him a one-of-a-kind special thing for being with the Park Service for long and being such a person who carried on the Civil War tradition so much. He used to come to the Kansas City Round Table several times and speak about once a year, so I had seen him.
There we go, I went back.
Oh. Okay.
I've seen that guy
Yeah,
out here in town.
He's 91, and he still tried to do everything he could that day and really worked hard. The United States government came up with 2 stamps to introduce to America for the first time. There was a huge long line. Great guy.
That guy's 91?
Yep.
Yep.
And
Sorry, guys.
wait, the stamps.
Glad to see you still
They had
alive.
2 stamps out, and there's a long, long line. They had all kinds of ways you could buy them. You could buy several of them. The one I have over there is just a envelope with Lee on it and one of the stamps that you could get. So that was kind of a special thing. And this, of course, is the McLean house, and looks pretty much the way it was. The courthouse is original too, but the rest of the village, of about 13 more buildings, have been kind of reconstructed, except maybe the 2-story jail and a few others. And of course, this is really where they went in. They took the horses out back till they were done. And go ahead, John.
At this point, they actually recreated the time frame on April the 9th, so Lee's already in the house here.
Yeah.
And he's waiting for Grant to show up.
Grant finally shows up. He wasn't dirty enough, but anyway, he showed up an hour and a half after Lee was in there about ready to go crazy. And there's Traveler after Lee had already gone inside out back. You can see some of the Union tents back here. There were a lot of them. Union troops always look kind of good. I thought the ones that they selected to be in the official stacking of arms, they weren't very dirty. They all looked like they'd been fed pretty good. I was a little disappointed they didn't pick people out a little bit better to represent the Confederates. This is Lee coming out afterwards. Of course, by now there's again 15,000 people all over. You can't hardly get a shot anywhere. I'm over here between the chicken coop and the house, and I stand there for an hour and a half waiting for this to happen, and I got a great shot. And this is by the way, at 3:10. He leaves, and that was 3:10 that day. They did everything pretty well right there. Now some of the Union people are starting to come out on the porch. He gets very anxious. He keeps trying to get that guy to bring the horse up. And he finally does, and then they salute him with a hat salute, and he salutes back. I'm right over there. You can't hardly see me. Then he leaves and goes through the huge crowd. Of course, it was really quiet and very respectful. And he went back down that road, all the way across the village, down another road, and up to his camp. And that's all still there today. The next day, on the 9th, they meet just for 15 minutes. That part is marked today. And they talked over some last-minute situations again, like the horrible condition the cab was in. There was just a few hundred Confederate cab left. Their horses were starving, the men were starving, and he asked permission for them to be first so then they could start walking home with their horses and do the spring plowing. This represents that place right there. You know where they met. When they met the first day, they set up a 3-man commission on both sides. Jocelyn Chamber was in charge of the 3-man commission for the Union. All the troops that accepted the arms from the Confederates were not his men. It had nothing to do with rank or whose men are there. For Lee chose Pendleton, Longstreet, and Gordon. And Gordon was the man who was really in charge for the Confederates. And Jocelyn Chamberlain had picked up on Abraham Lincoln's malice toward none, Grant's desire to follow the president's orders. Grant had met the president 10 days before this, and Lincoln said, you know, go easy on him, show respect, and Chamberlain went out of his way to do that. He had his men at 5:05 in the morning out there on the line ready to accept the stacking of arms from the infantry, and they didn't get there for 3.5 more hours, but he really was trying to do it right. He camped his men in the Rice house front yard. The Rices still lived there. Appomattox was and still is a very small town, almost untouched by the war. And when he went up to meet them and tell them, I'm going to set up my tent here, a lot of stuff like that, he gave them 2 or 3 pounds of coffee, and they were delighted. They hadn't had coffee for a couple of years. So those buildings are all recreated or the real thing. It looks like they're redoing this one now. This is Angela that was here last month, and this is the only remaining relative of Josh Chamberlain alive today, so she had a nice talk with him. He's also in the medical corps, and of course she's a nurse and really interested in the medical corps. So they had a good talk. This Lee's camp's way over here, and you go down and up this long road, you come into here, and then you go on the Stagecoach Road, which they call the Triangle, and go right down through Appomattox, and that is the same place, the Surrender Road.
The Rice House would be.
Yeah, right, this is the
right
fence,
over
the
there
Rice
on
House is right here.
that hill.
And this road that comes up here to form the triangle, Jocelyn Chamberlain, about 15 officers waited there on horseback for 3.5 hours for them to come up. And they sent a man down to find where they were, and they came up, and Gordon led. This man, let him go about another 20 yards, and then they made him furl the flag and not go any further. So he stood right there through the whole ceremony of stacking of arms. Here they start to come up this road, and Gordon's leading them. They had musicians with them, but there was no music played, there was no cadence. Most of them were just downtrodden and just kind of out of it, wondering what was going to happen next. One of their biggest fears was they were just going to just throw down their rifles and they were going to take them. They didn't know what was going to happen to them still. So this is more of them coming in for the stacking of arms. It was hard to get any kind of decent, clean shot there. There's just so many people. There's always somebody in your way. There's some guy in a green jacket who was did some parking in the parking lot or something, and he walked right in behind him with this big fluorescent green vest on. Some people have no concept. And the real ceremony, the Union was on both sides of the road for this thing, the 150th. They were on just one side. And when they get up to James Chamberlain, right there at the corner of the Rice House, he orders his men to shoulder arms. And so all of a sudden, all the Confederate officers almost automatically said shoulder arms. And the men straightened up, put their chins up, put their rifles properly, returned the respect that they got, and went through the ceremony much, much better than they thought they were going to get treated. They had to stack all of their arms, not just throw them on the ground, and put everything of war on there, and then put flags. There were 72 flags put across the stacked arms. They did get away with a few, but 72 were surrendered. And, you know, there was no catcall. These people were really respectful. Chamberlain and Grant really insisted on that. And so here they are.
Got the video?
Yeah, show them really real quick like.
Okay, minute and a half.
All right.
Can you handle that?
Oh, yeah.
Minute and a half.
There were some well-fed Yankees in that line, weren't there?
Well, yeah, the Yankees. In case you didn't know it, Appomattox Station, the train station outside of town a little bit of Appomattox, is where Lee was trying to get. There were 300,000 rations, boots, clothing, saddle or two, some equipment. That's why they were trying to get to Appomattox Station, not Appomattox. And then Custer cut them off, and was captured 100 cannon and all kinds of men. And at that point, everybody knew it was over. For 4 days, Lee and Grant have been kind of exchanging things. Maybe what if we surrender? What would be the terms? Yabba dabba. Not much was said. This is the men going out to stack arms. Anybody who wanted to, that wasn't handpicked to do this on the first 3 days, could do this march on Sunday. But John and I were already back.
You're going to see your guy at the end of this.
Oh, or is he in there?
Yeah, with the vest on. I didn't know how to cut him out. That guy down there on the left, he just kept walking into my vision. And
Yeah, a lot of inconsiderate people on these places and these things, but
Oh, yeah.
I did it. Yeah, a minute and a half.
Did I stop that? I must have stopped, sorry.
Does it have sound?
No,
No,
just wind.
it would just.
There wasn't any sound, everybody was silent.
Yeah, there wasn't any talking, there's no drums, it was really, everybody was really quiet there.
So that house that we showed you is just off the screen to the right.
Yeah, it's right up here.
They're coming up
They're
that.
coming right up that road. And they didn't pick very many to represent the infantry. The cavalry was let go almost right away. They were the first ones to get to parole. Then the artillery surrendered. And then, of course, the most of them were infantry. There was 28,211 men who finally got parole passes at Appomattox.
That's how many were at the surrender, was
Yeah.
28,000?
That's how many the government
There it is.
took in, 28,211.
Oh my God.
He's the guy who cleans up the horse.
Almost all the cavalry had already gone home. Those guys had just taken off on horseback and kept,
Without paroles?
without being paroled, yeah. There were, Lee thought he had 30,000 men maybe to surrender. He was pretty close. A lot of them had had gone home already. You can't blame them too much.
Slinking off.
Yeah.
There are 39 Beckners that fought for the South. The only one Beckner that made it was A.T. Beckner of the 6th Virginia Infantry. So I put on my infantry stuff and walked up the same road he did. John made a little video, which I appreciate very much. So, and then I walked up approximately where he might have been, the 6th Virginia Infantry. Took 3 days to run them all through. That was kind of a key thing for me, and very glad to do it. And when you type the name in Beckner, it pops up on this big screen and everything, and you know one of them really is officially there. It's pretty cool. Not very many people died at the Battle of Appomattox, and only one Union guy here, and some think that was a mistake. But anyway, that's a little cemetery right there in the 1,600-acre park. When I was trying to take a picture of Lee getting on Traveler after the pre-event, I yelled, hey, I've been waiting an hour and a half, get out of the way. And he turned around, it was Rick Hatcher, who I've known most of my life. He was the superintendent at Wilson's Creek for years. We did a lot of things together. Then he took over at Fort Sumter, and I went out to visit him there once. And they brought in all these people from all over the country to help make sure this thing went off right. So it was, Rick. So then we talked for about an hour after he finally got out of my way. There I am shaking Lee's hand, letting him know I stayed with him to the end. The Lee and the Grant were people who've done this as first-person stuff for a long, long time. Both were very good at it. He had a good, slow mannerism in his speech and everything. Maybe not quite as big and stocky in the shoulders that Lee was, but he did a good job, both of them.
The Museum of the Confederacy has opened an annex right there in Appomattox.
Yes.
And they had Lee's uniform and gauntlets and his sword on display.
That he had on when he surrendered Appomattox.
Did it look just like that? I mean, is that a pretty good replica?
It looked a little more gray.
A little more gray than blue, but
yeah.
of course it could have faded a little too.
Yeah.
But they,
very impressive.
Well, one other place, John, they made an annex besides Appomattox. The Confederate Museum in Richmond is taking a lot of stuff out and putting in other places. The building's in bad shape, the neighborhood's not good. Do you know the other place, John?
I can't think of it.
Anyway, they have farmed a lot of this stuff out. We got to see the real thing in the museum. He stayed there for about 3 hours. Just one person after the other wanted pictures and all that. So he was a busy man, earned his keep. When they signed the peace treaty at Appomattox, they rung a bell in Appomattox to let the whole world know this horrible thing was finally over. In 1972, an African-American woman, a descendant of a slave who lived in Appomattox, ended up with a bell. Nobody knows the story, she didn't tell it. So she brought it there, and all the dignitaries got to go up and ring it. All the ancestors did, and of course, how they got away, I went up and rang. I'm not trying to be a camera hog here. John just won't let me take his pictures. This is Angela in front of the courthouse again. The basement is a museum. And upstairs they have a video they show you and a map, a colored map that's really good, and some of those prized possessions. They decided to give every man a parole, even though the United States government didn't keep a list. And they had these sheets. Did your next picture show the sheets, John?
Yeah.
They had this printing press right on in this house.
Oh, they're drying.
And you could get 6 parole passes on each sheet. And then they put them up to dry, then where they dry, they went out. It took 3 days to get all 28,211 of them a pass. And the only time the Union troops made any gesture, of course, some of you know that they started firing cannon and going around, and then Grant said, no, none of that crap. We're not doing that. So they stopped that. And the only time the Union troops ever said much is when the very last battalion of the Confederates come in to surrender on the 3rd day. They all said hurrah once and quit. This is Grant's only living relative signed my pass for me. And it took 3 days to get them all the way through there. On the 4th day, you couldn't find a Confederate. I mean, they all went home. This pass is more valuable than you think. One of the things they were talking about on that 2nd day was Lee asked Grant if he could get some food for the men, and he immediately sent off for 25,000 rations for the men. There were 300,000 rations they just captured at Appomattox Station, so they're probably eating their own food. But anyway, he did that. He got them clothes, he got them shoes, and you could take this pass and get on any Yankee railroad or steamboat to help to get home. Most of the 28,000 just turned around and walked home, but particularly men from Louisiana and Texas took these passes, went back to City Point near Richmond, got on a railroad, took them up to the ocean. They got on a steamboat and were actually ferried all the way back to Texas and Louisiana. And then, of course, a lot of them, for example, around here, a lot of Missourians were taken all the way to New Orleans, then paroled, and then told to get home the best you can. They all had to walk. But anyway, it was a gesture. That's the grant guy signing something for me.
That's your parole.
That my, yeah, it is my
That's the
parole.
parole?
Yeah, my A.T. Beckner's
And that's a
parole.
really old guy, you say?
Yeah, he's pretty old. He tried to dye his hair, but it was a horrible dye job. If
Yeah.
you ever see his face, but he's really old.
How does it, there's no other descendants out there? I guess they just quit having kids in that family, huh, or boys?
That's the way it goes, though.
I don't know.
That's
John took 2 flags down there on April 10th. We went up on the McLean house and had Rick the Ranger. Holy cow.
That's Ranger Rick calling now.
yeah.
I'll call you back. Rick the Ranger took our picture and do the next one, John. John, even better. You're not supposed to have many of those there. By the way, they spent their whole time, the national park, you know, they always got to have some kind of little theme. The theme of the weekend was, this is not where the South surrendered, this is where America reunited.
Begin.
Anyway, John's mother made this for me. He's 14, it's still in great shape, and we wanted a picture of that, and we took it. And we started to get out of the way, because all these people were going up there, you could go through the house on your own. And this little old lady went, I want to hold it. So she came up there and she held it. And then pretty soon, 2 little old other ladies, I want to hold it. And they were lined up to come up there and hold it and take a picture. And finally, the guy kind of running the gate there said, you know, he told Rick, those guys are going to have to go. We're going to have to stop. So about maybe what, 5 or 6 other people finally before they stopped us from doing that. But we got our picture anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the last one for Appomattox.
Oh, that's the last one for Appomattox?
Yeah,
Holy cow.
That's Lynchburg, few for Lynchburg.
Of course, we tried to see everything we could. We stopped at Hamilton, Missouri and went in the J.C. Penney thing.
No, that was
And,
the wrong trip.
oh, that was the wrong trip. Okay, sorry. This trip we stayed in Lynchburg. There's no accommodations to eat or stay in Appomattox even today. So you had to stay in Lynchburg and drive back and forth. And they have this big Confederate monument up on the hill, and it's 139 steps down to the next level. This is Church Street. This is their museum, Confederate Museum in Lynchburg. And it's just real hilly. You go way, way down, you're on the James River. You can see at one time there was a lot of stuff went on down there, a lot of commerce. But this Church Street had just unbelievable, huge church of every denomination up there. And if you went up to the right a little bit, you started on street after street after street of mansions. Not just big houses, just mansions. So in the early 1900s, they must have really been wealthy. It's just all kinds of architect and kind of a neat town to be stranded in. They have a Confederate cemetery there in Lynchburg, and John and I stopped to see how many Missourians were there, and we found one Missourian was there. And
found a picture today on the internet that says there was a mass grave there for 99 Confederates that died from smallpox, which we didn't see.
no, we didn't see that.
As a little
Yeah.
Washington Monument type thing.
One of the other things there, I don't know if you guys got to see, is that, what they call the pest house.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
in our, it's supposed to put some folders over
Yeah,
there.
and also, when I went to Lynchburg, I didn't realize, the people there didn't tell me about it, and I found out later when I came back home, but the hull of the packet boat that took Stonewall Jackson's body up that far, and then eventually from there, of course, up to Lexington, that the hull of that packet boat's on display there in Lynchburg.
Yeah, they saw, you saw some pictures of it, and then for 30 years it was just a mess, and they finally cleaned it up again. But they did mention that. And here there's several, you know, monuments with names of people from different states. This is the James River, which we followed on the way out of town. If you've never seen the National Bridge, it's something else. It's taller than the Statue of Liberty. Jefferson Davis was the first American to own it. It's still in private hands. It's never been owned by any government entity. George Washington, as a young surveyor, surveyed this, climbed up 25 feet on this cliff and put in initials GW, which are still there.
Huh.
This is actually a road they still use across the top. They have a lot of lights to make it pretty at night. After you see this, you go by an Indian village, then you go by a cave used to help get gunpowder solutions out of. Then you get to the falls and some other things. So it's a nice little walk down and back. We went to VMI Military Institution again. It's just an enormous, unbelievable, beautiful place. Of course, they have their own museum. This is stone wall. His horse is buried right here. He was not just a math teacher, but he taught artillery at VMI. And they had 6 guns that he taught with. They loaned them all out for the war, and they did get 4 back, which is just a miracle in itself. So 4 of those are original guns. Mostly Mexican war guns, of course. There's old Sorrel. He's buried right there in front of them. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. Wow. Painting in the far wall of the chapel depicts, of course, their cadets that were at the Battle of New Market, and of course get credit for more or less turning the tide at New Market, when we all know it was the 1st Missouri Cav that did it. But anyway, it's a beautiful place. They were in session. There's a lot of cadets. And then their museum is just a beautiful museum. It's just unbelievable. They have the cadet tops and pants that a lot of them wore down through the years, some of them 100 years ago. They look so small. I mean, just unbelievable anybody ever got into those. And this is their monument to the VMI cadets. And their names are all back here in sort of a little cemetery type arrangement right there on the main street on the...
Back then, the average age was probably about 16.
Oh, the VMI cadets?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were really young. Some of them were really young.
Oh, yeah.
Then they have a monument of him out in the cemetery that's really cool. It's got hundreds of little Confederate markings and graves and everything else. Then you step off VMI campus, you step on the Washington and Lee campus. Siegel, our old friend from Missouri, they finally found something they were sure he wouldn't fail at, like he did everything else. So they sent him down the valley with 70,000 men, and the VMI cadets, broken down 1st Missouri Cav, some old men and some kids, with about maybe 20,000 of them. They took him on and beat him at New Market. And then his job was given to Hunter, another Missouri. General Hunter come in. And when they got to Lexington, they were told to burn everything. So they burnt the VMI, they burned every building in town, everything. And when they got to the Washington College campus, there was a 12-foot wooden statue of George Washington there, and the men said, nope, go ahead and shoot us if you want to, we're not burning this campus. That's why it never got burned, and of course later, Lee would go be their president, and now it's known as Washington and Lee. You can tell John cheated on the flags, because all of you know there were 15 black students on campus, and 3 of them complained about these flags being there, and they took them down. And of course, John couldn't let it go, so as soon as we walked in the door, he jumped this poor little old lady that asked us to sign the book. He said, when are they going to put those flags back up? And she said, well, we're planning, and we're going to do it better than ever. They're going to put up original battle flags they're having redone from different campaigns all over the South, and they'll be there maybe next month.
We actually won on an argument there, huh? I mean, they're going to put them back up.
It's not over yet, I suppose.
I'm sure it's not.
So anyway, you all been there, and of course he's not really in this tomb. He and, of course, the Lees and the Worstons were intermarried for generations, and downstairs underneath here there's about at least 20 Lees and Worston buried, including his actual body downstairs.
Jim?
And of course this horse traveler is buried right outside the door there. Yeah.
Years ago, they actually did have, those were original flags up on there, 25 years ago.
Well, apparently the
You
ones
could
they
actually reach up and touch these flags. I couldn't believe it that they were original. And then they put replicas up because of that, because they were, you know, out there in the open.
When those guys complained, the replicas were up there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's cute. People left apples and carrots for Traveler on his grave.
That's cool.
It's the last one for Appomattox.
The last one for Appomattox. This one is?
That one's the last one for Appomattox.
All right.
So you go to Cameron there.
Yeah, he didn't tell about, we drove hard getting there. We drove hard going home too. Right after we left here, I don't know, it was noon or something, we went and had lunch and got in the car and said, we'll just drive as far as we can, and when we get really tired, we'll stop and sleep. We drove straight through and got home midnight or 6 o'clock in the morning, some ungodly thing.
Wow.
Just real quick, we'll run through this, the Lincoln thing. They've been planning this for 9 years. They've been working hard for 5 years, and they were going to make this really, really special. The train, I didn't bring the train. The guy rebuilt the engine that finally got to Springfield, to Illinois. It was a 24th engine. Each state was responsible for furnishing 2 engines as soon as they got to their state. And every time there was a change in the width of the track, it went from 4'2" to 8 foot, to 8 foot and 1/2 inch to 5 foot. And so they had to have a different engine. There were supposed to never be more than 9 cars in the train. The train, we got pictures of the train.
A little bit.
Oh.
After you.
This is where at J.C. Penney's in Hamilton on our way up till we stopped by, and I was giving J.C. Penney some advice on how to sell things. But we also went to Camp Butler there. It's a national cemetery in Springfield, Illinois. It's really cool. Of course, that's the state capitol, and you can just go to a museum all week long. They had 44 military camps in Illinois during the war, and they took this one in Camp Butler and made it a prison camp. And there are, I want to say 300, that's not right.
Yeah, about
300
370 or something.
Confederate graves, but they didn't die in this prison camp. They were interned from island number 10. So John and I figured, well, that's in Missouri. There were surely some Missouri boys. We better go out there. And there was one guy from Louisiana. Everybody else was from Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas. Not a Missouri boy had been interned there. Downtown, their centerpiece of everything to do with Lincoln is the old courthouse. They used it until 1877. You have 3 stories here, and you have 6 below ground. And in 1909, they decided we're going to have to do something now or just bulldoze it. So they went and took every of these big sandstones, took every one apart and numbered it and took it to the state fairground and stored it for a couple of years. And they bulldozed everything else, and they started on the 6th floor down there and rebuilt it just like it was in 1877. Then they rebuilt, then they put this back on there, then they rebuilt the inside. Actually, it probably never looked as good as it does now because they just got done with it. And she admitted that the staircase is a little nicer than it was in the real time. They have the House of Representatives, House of Senate. They have the Attorney General office, the Treasury office. They have Douglas Stevenson's statue. But one picture we're missing here was we found another secession flag. Remember when I gave you a talk on secession flags? Mm-hmm. The 6th Illinois of some kind had rescued, supposedly, another 10x15 secession flag from the state of Missouri, and it's in this old capitol. Some really pretty good shape. Where was it from?
Missouri.
Yeah, but where in Missouri?
Yeah,
I think, what was it?
Up by Rockport, up in that area, wasn't it?
Okay, somewhere up in there. So anyway, we were really shocked to see that one there. So now we know there's 1 in Illinois and 2 in Kansas. We don't have any in Missouri, but maybe somehow we get them back. And of course, then the big thing after all the ceremony and all the jibber jabber was done, originally they were going to bring this train in. I started talking. The guy spent 6 years building it. He built it not just like it really was, but he had to build it to modern railroad standards. So the wheels weren't iron, they were steel, and et cetera, et cetera. Then when this thing formed, well, all around there, they have all kinds of neat memorials. The UP said you can't use the railroads, you can't use the trains. So it got stuck in Ohio. Then they were going to put it up on huge trucks and bring it in, but they were $100,000 short already of the money they hoped to raise to put on this huge ceremony this year, and nobody would pay for it to be hauled down there. So the train never made it. It's really a beautiful little thing. Another man went to unbelievable trouble to make the funeral car itself. There were actually 2 of them, and those are the only 2 cars that made it from all the way from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois in the 3-week period that the country mourned him. And by the way, it was the same trace. I got the trace back there. It was the same path he took when he became president from Springfield, Illinois to Washington, D.C., except they were scared of too many Southerners in Cincinnati and Louisville, so they skipped them. A guy made this also to meet modern standards. You had to change the wheels, and they had to put metal frames in here instead of all wood frames. There was a huge argument over what color it really was. It had been sold 5 times. Its last owner was an Ohio farmer who had it out in the middle of a field, and a grass fire started and burned it all up. But they went out there, found enough that was left, and found chips and found out it was deep maroon. Just a beautiful thing, and they really went to a lot of trouble. Yet, of course, 2 had to stay off the rail. This is right next to the rails that actually brought Lincoln in. This is where they stopped and unloaded the casket 150 years ago. And just some more pictures of that.
So that's in
There were
Spring-
two of them.
That's in Springfield?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Right now it's on tour. It's going to go to about 8 or 9 Illinois towns and 4 or 5 in Ohio on the back of a truck. There were two of these. Lincoln's body was one. They also dug up Willie, his son, who had died 3 years early, and put it on the train. Mary was never there. Mary wasn't on the train. Mary wasn't at their funeral. There is no proof that Mary ever went to Lincoln's tomb. She lived for 2 years with a sister in Illinois later in her life, and no one has any proof that she went then, and she visited from time to time later in her life, and no one knows if she ever went out there or not. So that's kind of a...
Did you tell them about the wheels?
Yeah, well, about
About the width of the wheels? So
Oh,
that-
yeah. This rail car was meant for Lincoln to use in his second term. They figured he's going to have to do a lot of travel, mend a lot of fences. And so the wheels are special width, and they move so they can handle anything from 4'2" to 8.5 inches. They couldn't handle a 5 foot. But so they were specially made. He never went to see it. He was scheduled to see this rail car, not go in it, but scheduled to see it the day after he was shot. And so anyway, it was quite a thing. Quite a special car. Okay, the funeral procession, we need to speed up here a little bit. The funeral procession was led by 5 generals, including General Cook, who went on to be our biggest Indian fighter after the war. Then they had the president's own band in red. Then they had more and more and more Yankees. People around the hearse with white. There was 12 of them. They were all ministers from Washington, D.C. or Springfield. You see a red sash, it means he's a higher up monkey muck. 6 matching black horses, beautiful. The hearse was made and paid for by a local mortician in Springfield, Illinois. It's just beautiful, just like it really was. We not only could see it, they put the casket in there several times. We could see the casket in there. They had a big thing set up on 6th in Massachusetts or whatever it was, and they had all kinds of dignitaries. The governor did a good job, the mayor did a good job. Lincoln actually was in the Illinois militia when he fought the Black Hawk War, so the National Guard officer was there, give a nice talk. This is the casket. By the way, this hearse is the one that carried him from the railroad station in Springfield to the tomb. When they stopped this during his 3 weeks, every time they stopped in a major town, they took his body out and put it in another hearse. So sometimes you'll see a hearse that carried Lincoln's body won't look anything like this because it's the one they used in Philadelphia, the one they used in New York, the one they used somewhere else. Almost a third of the northern population saw the train during this 3-week period. When it was scheduled to go straight through from one big city to the other, in the middle of the night, everybody in the county would come. They made huge bonfires, and they just watched the train go by and cheered, put the fire out, and went back to bed. So it was really a thing. Everybody was so high and so happy the war was over. Then 5 days after his second inauguration speech, he is shot, and all of a sudden, the whole country's down again, north of the Mason-Dixon line. Then they had the local fire engine that in the real possession, pulled by horses. Behind the hearse was also wagons carrying family and close friends. And some of those people were actually ancestors of the people who were really in the possession. Then they had possession. There was probably about 400 or 500 of us civilian clothing. And the first 1.2 that was done on one day early, a lot of people were in it. And when this took 3 hours to go 2.7 miles on the asphalt. It was hard to do. And you might see there's not as much black as you might think. In those days, only the family and close friends were allowed to wear dark black, everything black, hat, tie, coat, vest, shoes, everything. Everybody else was supposed to wear some kind of color. I was going to wear a colored vest, but it shrunk in a closet this winter.
Weird.
So anyway, that was kind of a neat deal. If you look up C-SPAN, Lincoln's funeral procession, myself and 2 women I was with, you can see us clearly walking into Oak Hill Cemetery, so we did make the national news once. Go ahead, we're spending too much
Last
time
one
on
on
this.
the funeral, the rest of them are just...
Yeah, that's the only house the Lincolns ever owned. Of course, the National Park Service has a village there. There's a statue downstairs. Right behind the statue is the law office. There's the guy that caused it all.
Yay!
We all got one of these, John and I, everybody registered got one of these. It was supposed to be exact replica of the one everybody was given through the real possession 150 years ago.
That's it.
Cool.
That's
Wanna
it,
see
and
the
on and on.
coffee wagon.
Oh, yeah. Some guy invented this in 1863 and gave it to the YMCA in 1864, and they took it out and yet the troops use it. It's a huge coffee machine with three, out front there are 3 different spigots. I'd never seen anything like it before.
Nice.
Oh,
So a lot of neat things, met a lot of neat people. I met 22 people I know, I already knew in Springfield. I was kind of surprised to see that many. Anyway, during the break, there's more pictures back there. Any questions real quick, Mike?
Tim,
Yeah.